Although I was shocked by the imagery, I wasn't surprised that it had happened. These events are becoming more frequent and more extreme, and I am used to them now. I think many are. I think this reaction on my part is not uncommon now. There has been a psychological change. People are changing and have changed. Although there are still many on the left actively working to bring the West down, still in denial or just wishing to put their heads in the sand. Many people are being red-pilled really quickly right now. Those who have already been red-pilled for a while are changing also. I believe that we are hardening ourselves for what is yet to come. Sometimes I feel angry about it, but mostly I see all of this as being particular events in a particular process that needs to run its course. This is what Tolstoy talks about in War and Peace when he refutes the great men of history thesis. In some way I understand what he means now. I feel as though the tide of history is on the move again. I was not surprised to see the usual narratives from leftists. I was not even angered. In the past I would have been, but I am not now. Leftists are doing what they do, what they have to do. They are horrible, but that's why they are leftists. People wouldn't be real leftists, true believers, unless they actively despised themselves and their civilization. They are what they are in the main. The two narratives they seem to be pushing are the following. The first is the usual, not all Mohammedans are like that, or this was the work of a few individuals, not Mohammedanism as a whole. Of course, they didn't use the same line of argument for Dylan Roof, but again, that's how it works with them. That's fine, more on them in a while. The new narrative around which they seem to be trying to organize is that the so-called refugees suffer this kind of brutality on a daily basis, and so that's why they should be allowed into the West as refugees. Of course, we know that's completely absurd, and that is why what happened in Paris happened. ISIS warned that they were going to get terrorists into Europe under the guise of being refugees, and they have shown that they were serious about that. A lot of average people seem to be latching onto this idea of solidarity with the French, and they are modifying their Facebook profile pictures accordingly. Aside from being pretty useless, it's a stupid idea. Solidarity with the French people is inherently a completely apolitical message upon which anyone can affix anything, especially something both as vacuous and dangerous as all humanity should come together, or something of the like. Average people go along to get along, however, and don't like to engage in very much reflection. So this idea is what it is. When I spoke to Millennial Woes, he said he thinks these people will change quite quickly once the political situation changes. He said it will be quite amazing to watch them do an about-face, but they will. I am inclined to agree with him. Some people on the right think this is a false flag attack. Perhaps, though even if it were, that still wouldn't change the fundamental nature and danger of Mohammedanism. I don't want to go into conspiracy theories though. Some people on the right think this is going to give Marine Le Pen a huge boost in the polls, and she will win the French presidential election in 2017. This is wishful thinking, I believe. Even if she were to win, I don't think she would accomplish enough, because she wouldn't have the stomach for what history demands now. However, I don't believe she will win for several reasons. Firstly, in the lead up to the election, the cathedral will go into overdrive in demonizing her. That won't be enough though, as she could still win if they were to get that wrong. So there will be electoral fraud in key electorates, just to make sure. Finally though, I just don't think she will get the numbers unless things really change, though perhaps they will. The way the French presidential election works is that they have 2 rounds of voting. In the first round, there can be multiple candidates. All but the top 2 are eliminated for the second round, which is a runoff. If Le Pen were to face Hollande, the socialist, in the second round, she would likely win by then because she would get enough of the supporters of the centre-right Republican candidate to get her over the line. Recent polls have gone either way, but she will probably increase her support, and Hollande will probably lose some of his by 2017. Yet that will not happen unless there are multiple candidates from the Republicans who split their vote and send Hollande to the second round. Would they do that? I don't know enough about them personally and whether they would do that, especially knowing that it could well lead to Le Pen beating Hollande. As we will see, both the Republicans and Socialists seem pretty keen to prevent Le Pen from winning, even if they have to collaborate to do so. If Sarkozy or Juppé, the 2 likely Republican candidates to be able to get to the second round, are ahead of Hollande and get to the second round, all of Hollande's supporters will vote tactically for the Republican candidate, simply to prevent Le Pen from winning. I don't think Le Pen will win. I actually don't think she would do what would be necessary to avoid what will come otherwise. She would need to forcibly repatriate all of France's Mohammedans, which she wouldn't do. She would only go part way in solving this crisis, and that would prolong France's demographic woes and make the crisis even worse when it finally comes. The only possible thing I imagine from her winning is that she might set in motion the dissolution of the EU, which could, in turn, lead to a rise of the right generally across Europe. I wouldn't advise anyone to hold his breath waiting for all of that, though. Instead, Le Pen probably wouldn't accomplish very much. I believe that eventually things are going to come to a head. The longer Europe waits, the worse it will be when the crisis occurs. There will be more invaders. There will be more children from those invaders. And the Europeans will have indebted themselves via their welfare systems. I think the sooner it does occur, the less damaging it will be for Europe and Europeans when the crisis arrives. I also think there are going to be big economic issues in the next few years. He who is holding the bag when they come, regardless of whether he deals with them as well as they can be dealt with, or as badly as they can be dealt with, will fall the fallout of these issues. In this regard, the left should fully own all of that. It is bad that the centre-right under the Republicans will likely own all of that from 2017 rather than the socialists, because then the socialists will be able to point fingers. Yet I'd still rather anyone else get stuck with that than the real right. The way I see things moving over the next few years is that currently a lot of people are probably very shocked. They probably do hope that somehow Marine Le Pen or an equivalent in other nations will ride in on a white horse and save them. That's not going to happen. They need to see her lose in 2017 so that they can take the next dose of the red pill and understand that it's not just the Mohammedans who are the problem, but that much of the indigenous establishment is the real problem. When they see that there is no hope through the normal channels, that is, electoral politics, in 2017, Then they will truly be red-pilled. There will be war in Europe in the next few years. I think that multiple events this year have brought that war closer. A few years ago, I might have put the war somewhere in the mid to late 20s. However, I will be surprised if we get out of this decade without war in Europe. Europeans will win. I have no doubt about that. Although many Europeans are decadent or actively support the enemies of the West, increasing numbers of young European males are gearing up for war. Unlike their parents or grandparents, they have little to lose and much to gain. Their prospects, student debt, limited employment options, a poorer standard of living than previous generations, degraded institutions, omnipresent crime, and many other things, are atrocious. Their psychology is changing, and they are organizing. There will be many who will come to their aid, either physically or materially. Those people will come from Eastern Europe. They will come from North America. They will come from the Antipodes. They will come from South Africa. They will even come from parts of Latin America, and maybe even from some other regions. Europeans are smarter, better organized, and generally more adept at really conducting war. Not all of those genes were gunned out of them at the Somme. This is also their great awakening. They have been in a spiritual malaise for the past 70 years at least, and have descended into depravity and nihilism. But this will be their great spiritual awakening. Many in the armed forces, not necessarily the command, but the lower officers and those without commissions, will aid them. Europe will not fall. Though the casualties and the destruction to sacred sites and great works of culture will be immense, Europe will not fall. What of the aftermath? Europe and Mohammedanism are incompatible. As long as Mohammedanism remains, there will always be potential trouble. The victors in Europe will see this. They will understand this. Liberalism in all of its forms will be washed away in victory. Multiculturalism will meet such a deluge and be inert and inadequate before it. Mohammedanism will have to go. Mohammedans will have to go. Perhaps they will choose to leave of their own volition as they start losing the war. Of course, one might ask to where they will go. I don't know. There might very well be nowhere for them to go. Which non-Mohammedan nations would be foolish enough to invite tens of millions of such people into their midst? Would Mohammedan nations even be willing to do so? I don't know. Some may suggest that they will be deported forcibly. I believe that won't happen. It would be very difficult to round them all up. It would then be a logistical nightmare to move tens of millions of people by sea, making sure they didn't revolt. And again, where would they go? To force them on another nation or nations would involve more war and the ability to hold land long enough to complete the very lengthy process. Could that happen? Maybe, but I don't think so. No, I think it will happen the old-fashioned way. The great rivers of Europe, the Seine, the Rhine, and the Danube, will run red with blood. There will be so much of it that it will wash upon the shores of North America and Western Australia. I neither want it to happen nor don't want it to happen. I feel detached from all of this now. I am dispassionately watching a nature documentary of a lion rising to chase a jackal that has been biting its rump in its slumber. Likewise, the traitors in Europe who have aided and abetted what has occurred will meet their own gruesome end. I used to find the notion of public executions abhorrent. These days, although I might not cheer them on, I would probably just shrug my shoulders and walk away. All of this has been set in motion. It is what it is, and it will be what it will be. I am prepared for what is coming.